My name's Susanne Pearson. I came to England on the Kindertransport in the summer of 1939. The title of this year's The Power of Words, which is applying to the Holocaust Memorial Day, is very meaningful for me because myself and so many more of us in my situation have been telling our stories to show what can happen when one group of people can be persuaded, a decent group of people, as was the case. Germans were decent people, but if they could be persuaded that all Jews were bad, does that mean that we're all persuadable? I'm also spurred on to do so by a letter which my father left for me before he and my mother were deported from Prague in 1941 to a ghetto in Poland. He left me a letter in the hope that they would return, but in the event they never did, and I never saw them again. And in his letter he urged me to think about people in a good way, that people were all good, and that I should try and lead a helpful life, and that has always stayed with me. I was living in Prague. I was going to school. In 1938, it started to become quite clear that Jews were very persecuted both in Germany and in Austria. And we were receiving refugees. My mother had a spare room in our flat. As an only child, I listened to adults' conversations. I could learn about the persecution of Jews. And of course, I knew we were Jewish. In the autumn of 1938, Hitler invaded the Sudetenland where we had relatives. My mother took me to the train station because she had hoped that our relatives would come to Prague where it was still safe. And I think that was my first vision of refugees. And that's a word again, isn't it, that we use within the power of words. What does it actually mean? What does being a refugee mean? What does being an asylum seeker mean? What drives people to leave everything and to come away? And although I didn't recognize that so much, I'm 10 years old at the time, I did see these people coming. And I also saw my mother being very upset that our relatives, and they were my cousins, didn't come. They paid for that with their lives. They became part of the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. 1.5 million Jews, of those were children. So how come that I'm still here, able to tell this story? To a man called Nicholas Winton. He's died now, but he lived to be 105. He became Sir Nicholas Winton. And when what was Czechoslovakia was invaded, he came to the British government because he realized there was nothing in place for Czech children. He got an agreement from the British government to bring over one child for every family that he could find who would give a guarantee to look after that child. In the event, he brought here 669 children. He managed to find 1,000 families in Britain who said they would take a child. I wonder if you'd find that now. My mother and father decided to apply for me to come here. Then they started talking about us trying to leave. And then they talked to me about me leaving without them. And again, I can remember saying I wasn't going to do that. I do remember my mum packing my case for me to leave for England. I still have the list of the contents. And when I look down it, it says 1 rain cape, 4 coats. She'd heard that there was going to be all this rain and she was making sure that I was going to be kept dry. At the end of June 1939, I came on a train with some friends because I belonged to an organisation called the Woodcraft Folk, and it was really through Woodcraft Folk families that I was able to come to England, because they had offered homes for children as well. We said goodbye to our parents. Our parents assured us that they would see us again soon, that it would be easier for them to leave if we had gone to a place of safety. At that time I was 11 years old. I think about that these days when I hear about lone children crossing continents and so on. What terrible situations they must be coming from, what decisions their parents have to make. We arrived in Harwich in England. Most of us, a night on the boat was quite a new experience, and I was brought to Sheffield. The war hadn't started, it was July 1939, but of course, as we all know, the war did start in September, and of course things changed very rapidly after that. The letters from my parents ceased very quickly, and it wasn't really until some years after the war that I learned that they'd been deported from Prague in 1941. I also learned that my father died in this ghetto a year later, but I do not know to this day what happened to my mother. I only know that she was still alive in 1943 when she herself was 39 years of age. I'd like to close by saying that I'm grateful and proud, I suppose, to have the opportunity to participate in Sheffield's Holocaust Memorial Day. And Sheffield has, after all, been very kind to me. And so, in a way, it's a little way of paying back and also bringing, through the power of words, the thinking behind why we still have to remember these dreadful times, and how hopefully in remembrance we learn to be more tolerant. In the hope that they would return, but in the event they never did, and I never saw them again.